lonely over here.
Welcome, everyone, to the Joint Council and Planning Commission work session that's being held on Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and do roll call, because you're probably familiar with who all the planning commissioners are. So, Angela Jefferson.
Present.
Peter Agavi. Councilmember Agavi, sorry.
Present.
Councilmember Kathy.
Present.
Planning Commissioner Brandon Staff.
Present.
Planning Commissioner Grace Edwards. Present. Councilmember Michael Althauser.
Present.
Planning Commissioner Michael Tobias.
Here, present.
I messed up your name.
All right.
And then Planning Commission Chair Elizabeth Robbins. Present. Councilmember Eileen Fortha. Present. Planning Commissioner Terry Kirkpatrick.
Present.
City Council Member Kelly Von Holt. Present. So we have a few that are absent, and so those are the ones that are present, and then we will see if there's anyone else that shows up. All right. So with that, we will move into the 2025 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update, the Joint Work Session Development Code, and I will turn it over to staff.
Presentation up. Just to let everybody know, this is our first trial run, a joint work session with the council and the planning commission, specifically element or part of the comprehensive plan update. So we are going to be experimenting tonight. Thank you for attending. On what can work. And it looks like we lost the presentation. There we go. And if we could also maybe expand the council members so we can see those. Okay. So tonight, what we want to do is we wanted to start our discussions of the 25 update on the development code update. So your staff reports that you received details everything, almost everything, that we'll need to address as part of the development code update process. That is far too much to try to deal with in an hour's time, so we decided let's just focus on housing. And the more that we looked at that, then we realized we probably have to focus even more. So you'll notice that we'll be hitting some big topics first, and then as we have time, we'll have some other housing-related items. So just very quickly, again, the need for housing in the city. This is the 20-year projection. This is more importantly our 20-year allocation. What we are planning for, what we're required to accommodate as part of the update. That's 6,676 new housing units within the city itself and over 2,000 in the UGA. That's about a little more than, well, it's about 70% more housing than what we currently have. So that's a significant number. The other really important thing is how that's going to be broken out. And this sort of does two things. It shows a breakdown by the annual median income from under 30% AMI, middle is about 80%, 81% and higher are on the far end. You'll notice the narrowest sections are the ones that we currently have more of than others. The ones that we're probably the city is going to have to spend a lot of effort to try to accommodate and try to figure out how to allow the market to accommodate or provide public support for is the under 80%. Because those things are going to require some level of public investment or some level of incentive in order to get those kinds of units built in the city.
Brad?
Yes.
Are those numbers the ones that the TRPC is? Okay.
That is from the TRPC housing
And
allocation.
it's still the same.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. So very quickly, a little bit of background of what the development code does and what it covers. Our zoning regulations, permit procedures and fees all directly influence what happens and where it happens within the city. In part, we're guided by the Growth Management Act that sets particular requirements, and the state, as you're probably aware, has recently set some very explicit requirements on what we can do in terms of allowing for development. Permit procedures is going to be a big component. Bills that come as through the legislature establishes new deadlines and new procedures for reporting, part of that process. So separate conversation we'll be having, we'll be dealing, discussing that particular aspect. And then finally, as part of the comp plan update process, we're dealing with all the infrastructure. That includes everything from transportation, police services, water, sewer, et cetera, and how we're going to accommodate all those things. Very quickly, development regulations, again, are legal tools of turning the policies in our comp plan into explicit rules for developers to follow as they build in the city. I'm having issues with this. And our zoning map is basically a translation of our citywide comprehensive land use map. That just tells us the location and boundaries of where specific uses and intensities are throughout the city. In your packet, I've included a copy of our zoning map. Is, I think, probably the best illustration of kind of the intensities and where things are located. The lighter tans and yellows are our lowest density zones. You'll see that it occupies more than half of the city. Probably having some level of change in what happens in those particular zones as part of this process. So, as part of this discussion, we wanted to focus on some very specific questions for the commissioners and the council members. First of all, as we're going through this discussion, be thinking about how the code language can be simplified to allow more housing to be built. We know we have an allocation to be addressed. We know that we have a need, even without the allocation, to provide more housing. What ways can the staff be looking at to simplify the codes that are being proposed, or ask the question, is this really necessary? And finally, what specific concerns that you have that we should also be thinking about in addition to these particular requirements as we go through them? So our intent really is to focus in on very specific housing-related amendments. The first one will be dealing with middle housing, and Erica will be taking the lead on that. We'll talk a little bit about accessory dwelling units. We'll talk about co-housing and other residential ownership types. Talk about reuse of existing housing, and then we'll hit a couple other topics that I think we may not have full time for discussion, but I think it's things that we should be keeping in mind as we have further discussion. So to start, middle housing, an example from the city. As if, I'm sure you all remember this particular house from our tour.
All right, good evening, everyone. Yeah, middle housing, I'm sure you guys remember the last time we did a joint tour. We took a tour of Olympia, Tumwater, and the surrounding area. We looked at different types of middle housing, and just for a refresher, it's a term that's housing that falls at a scale between detached single-family homes and large multifamily complexes. So these types of housing units are duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, townhouses, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. The intent of House Bill 1110 was to increase middle housing in areas traditionally dedicated to single-family detached housing. And the requirements are to allow for at least 2 units per lot in residential zones, and at least 4 units per lot in residential zones if one of the units is dedicated as affordable housing. There is an alternative for the density calculations and unit calculations. The city meets the density requirements on 75% of the lots that are primarily dedicated to single-family zoning. Commerce just provided guidance on that, so staff are still reviewing that guidance to see how that could be interpreted. There are other requirements for ADUs, parking, and transit availability that are broader than within this bill. We also can meet those density requirements with House Bill 1337, which allows 2 ADUs per lot. So that will help us reach that density and unit requirement. And within this, we also need to allow at least 6 of the 9 types of middle housing in residential zones. And also, as part of this, we are to allow zero lot line short plats. And that's a use of flexible setback regulations or variances to allow residential homes to be sited on the property line, typically one or more property lines.
So there's a couple of quick clarifications. When we say we're obligated to allow for two dwelling units per lot, there is no minimum lot size outside of 1,000 square feet. So what that means is effectively, any lot that currently exists in the city or could be developed as part of the subdivision above 1,000 square feet could either have two single-family houses, a duplex, single-family house, or an ADU, and meet that requirement. That's throughout the city. And that's in any residentially zoned area that allows for residential. Second thing is, the 6 of the 9 middle housing types range from duplexes up to sixplexes, so that's 5 different types there. Attached housing, which is like a single-family house attached physically to another one and so forth, a townhouse essentially. Cottage housing, stacked units, which if you've ever been to Chicago or an older city is one apartment, you know, looks like a house, but when you look at it closely, it's apartment, and a couple other options that are kind of detailed. So we're looking at a pretty big variety of housing types. The other important thing to very quickly touch on is if one of those units is affordable, meaning up to 50 years, 80% and under AMI, they can do 4 units. That's 2 duplexes, a 4-plex, whatever the combination is that equals 4. So that's kind of what we're talking about. Middle housing, and it creates an interesting issue because they refer to this as lot density, and all of our zoning is based on density by acre. So we're trying to make both of those things work, especially when we start talking about infrastructure.
I have 2 questions. One, on the first one, is that, when you're talking about one of the units being affordable, is that along the lines of what we're doing with apartments, and are we extending that kind of opportunity if they build 3 ADUs and one's affordable? Are we giving them any incentives for that?
Well, it would be allowed, they would, essentially the incentive would be they would get the extra 2 units. So being able to build only 2 per lot, they could go up to 4. And then all the requirements that are in state law of how long that could be affordable, 50 years minimum, all that. So it's a little different from the incentive programs that we have.
And then it looks like the legislature changed it to 2,000 square feet, because ours is 800,
For ADUs.
for ADUs,
And
yeah.
we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate your excitement.
Yeah, and this doesn't account for lots that are zoned at a higher density. So think when we say residential zones, it's also the lower density lots. There are certain zoning designations within our code that only allow 1 single-family residence.
Councilmember Kathy has her hand raised.
Oh, it was hiding in the background. Councilor Kathy?
Oh, thank you. I'm just wondering if some of the things that we've talked about in the past are taken into consideration when I look and see that all these, and thank you for sending that material, to allow 6 or 9 different types we have. Is talking about the size of these as it relates to the neighborhood and as it relates to people who live immediately next door or within the shade of, or, I'm concerned about it totally changing the neighborhood. I hope that we spend some time considering how this change fits into what is already there. So you're not looking at a 4-plex or a 6-plex or something stacked on top of itself in a neighborhood of what was pretty much single family houses or AUDs. And that's one thing. And the other is I'm not a fan of 0 lot lines. I think that's difficult if you're not good neighbors or if you're next to people who don't keep up or louder. I think we're asking for a little bit of extra, not trouble, but difficulty there. So, and I remember talking about this before, and I just wanted to bring it up again. I think we talked about it in general. So, thank you.
So very quickly, we are allowed to look at compatibility when we're looking at design between the new proposed and the existing neighborhood. But there are some restraints on how far we can go with design guidelines. It has to be administrative, meaning we don't have a design board as now, so that helps us. But we have to look more closely at how much flexibility we may have to sort of deal with those design-related issues. I understand the concerns with the zero lot line. I'm not exactly sure how we can solve that, given what the state requirements are. And I'm hoping that there are going to be some examples from other jurisdictions in the Central Puget Sound shortly of how they solved all these problems, so we don't have to try to figure it all out ourselves. Thank you for your comments.
Elizabeth has a question. Brad, I know it's still pretty early in your presentation. Maybe you're going to get to this through the rest, but I'm wondering, for the middle housing portion, and maybe across the board too, to what degree would all future developments have to adhere to this legislation in order to meet the housing unit goals?
So someone could propose to build something less than this, but they would be able to build up to the maximum. So that if we allow for 2 units per lot, they could build up to 2. They don't necessarily have to. It plays havoc sometimes with us trying to figure out infrastructure needs and everything else when we have an assumption of level of development that can occur. And for example, right now, when we say we have a maximum density, we're pretty sure we're going to hit that maximum density because that's just the way the market has been going. I'm not necessarily sure how that's going to play out on the individual lots and building going forward for that. So it's a challenge for us. It's up to the individual developer to decide how they want to fit in with what the regulations allow.
That latter part is really what I'm getting at, which is, what do we have to do to reach our goals? And it's almost this. I mean, it's not the case that this law prohibits less dense development, but in order to reach our goals, we're pretty much going to have to
Figure out other ways to incentivize
stretch
things.
into encouraging it pretty much everywhere, right? Is that fair? Michael?
So this says that there's broader requirements for parking. Are we gonna talk about parking later in the presentation? Like we've had ADUs, we've allowed ADUs for years. Nobody has really done it very much. And I think in part because we've required the parking. And it's just, those lots that we've planted over the years were not built to accommodate additional parking spaces. Like, we could have all the density in the world, but if they don't also meet the parking requirements, then we're not actually gonna get there. So are we also gonna talk about parking?
We will touch on parking. Parking by itself, I think, is going to be a longer conversation, and we may not cover everything tonight. I think the important thing that we're seeing when we're trying to figure out how to deal with the off-site parking requirements, in a lot of cases, it's reduced if you're near transit of some level or other things like that, which I think works fine if you live in Tumwater and work in Olympia and everything you do is on that transit line. It doesn't work if you have 2 cars and you have to figure out on-street parking. And that's part of the calculation that we have to figure out is, well, are our streets big enough to accommodate cars that are probably going to be there, whether or not we require them up the space on the lot or not. I don't think our requirements to require a parking space is driving people to buy cars. So it's a bigger issue, but I think we'll definitely have to come back with you for the discussion.
Continuing on with some more middle housing requirements, we must limit the design review for middle housing to standards that apply to single-family residences. Middle housing cannot be more restrictive than single-family residences. The parking requirements for middle housing goes based on, so these are requirements. They could always have, they have the capacity to provide more parking. This is just what we would require per the code. So for lots less than 6,000 square feet, it would be 1 parking space and 2 spaces on lots that are greater than 6,000 square feet. Commerce guidance, when I was reading through it, for lots that are exactly 6,000 square feet, jurisdictions could decide whether they want to require 1 or 2 parking spaces, but to promote middle housing, and to go along with the idea that the less parking that's required, the more housing you can provide, they suggested going with the 1 space. Commerce's approval of substantially similar plans and regulations. I think this is giving us flexibility within these requirements to make the code changes to fit the city of Tumwater. It will need to be approved by Commerce. Also, Commerce can grant a timeline extension if these requirements and code updates will result in displacement or overburden infrastructure. If that's the case, our CFP, our Capital Facilities Plan update, can also be delayed if the extension is granted. The middle housing, so House Bill 1110 also says condos or homeowner associations cannot prohibit the implementation of middle housing. So when we talk about infill, they cannot discourage it, or yeah.
For overburdening of infrastructure, is that a road? Like if there would be a traffic impact study indicates that it would be excessive amounts of traffic, or is that more talking about like water mains and sewer?
It's both, actually. So water mains and sewer would probably be most applicable to us because there are areas currently that aren't served, and the level to get to that point might be beyond just a fund development. It'd be very burdensome to do something like that.
Does that stall essentially the entire thing, or would we petition Commerce for like, yeah, we can implement this whole thing throughout the city, but we have this one neighborhood that we need a couple of years to get a sewer line down here, actually?
We're not sure yet, because we haven't gone to that level of detail yet, but I expect that we probably would be doing some of that. And we're not necessarily sure, I'm saying this as a staff person who's read through this a couple of times, what the 75% works and the other 25% actually works. Even after looking at the Commerce guidance, I'm still not clear what that is yet. So there will be some things that we'll have to come back to you with more information.
All right, so here is the pallet middle housing types. I kind of briefly went over them earlier in the presentation. With this, I wanted to show you guys the kind of feedback we've gotten from the community. At our housing open house and our Juneteenth event, it's going to be this board over here with the sticky dots. Based on community feedback, this will be helpful for knowing what types of middle housing the community feels like would be a good fit for the city of Tumwater, because the state is requiring that we allow 6 out of the 9. So I thought it would be good to gauge where they're kind of, what would be best incorporated within the city. Kind of as Joan was saying, Councilmember Kathy, with her concerns with infill development and not fitting the characteristics of neighborhoods. We have quite a few, 10 actually, selected cottage housing. So that's our #1 right now. That's smaller residential units, smaller houses. They're all built looking into a courtyard or a shared common space. And then we have 5 to 6 plexes actually got quite a few. My feedback that I received was because they want places for their family generational wealth and housing for future generations. They want to have the option to purchase multiple units so everyone can age in place with family. We also have our standard duplex side by side and townhouses. So that would be an example of 0 lot lines or individual units that share a common wall. could also be kind of identified as condos, like what we saw in the middle housing tour on Tumwater Hill, the brand new condos. Not as much support for triplexes or fourplexes or stacked duplexes or courtyard apartments. But this is good for staff to know kind of what to incorporate into the code when we are trying to promote more middle housing types within the community and looking at zoning and allowable uses.
And we're also still in the process of collecting the online housing survey that we've had, and we'll hopefully be able to share some of those results with you at a meeting in the future. So we're trying to get a number of different avenues for it.
So this is, we've gotten some great feedback so far about how the code language could be simplified or what concerns you have that should be addressed with the middle housing. Is there any other kind of, after that last slide or knowing about like the middle housing types, any more questions, comments?
Yeah, Michael?
Brad, you mentioned about conversion of homes into apartments. Is that, I'm thinking, for example, in North Tacoma where they have a stock of Victorian era houses, so, like 1890s or so, that have been converted from, what was essentially a mansion into apartment housing. Would such a conversion like that of a large house into multiple apartments fall into middle housing? Or would that, okay, I didn't know if that was middle housing or.
Yeah, it's actually potentially, if the individual units have their own kitchen and bath facilities, then probably middle housing. If they share, then there's the shared housing component of that. And that's actually an interesting one because for like rooming houses and shared housing is typically found in higher density areas. And how that could potentially work in the city would be something we'll have to figure out. Because in a lot of cases, it would be in a single family area. And do we want to allow for that? And if we do, what could that look like?
So hypothetically, if I was a single owner of a single family house that was, say, 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, we have like 1-to-1 for each, and I wanted to convert it into apartment house, into 3 apartment units, would I be able to do that in a single family zoning area, or would I have to apply for like a multifamily exemption of some kind?
It depends on the level of number of units that it would be allowed in the zoning. So potentially, you could potentially subdivide it into a duplex, or if there's higher density, into something else. But it'd probably be on a case-by-case basis.
Good feedback. All right, now we're going to kind of dive into, we are going to dive into accessory dwelling units. I wanted you guys to look at this picture and see how this existing single-family residence, how it looks compared to the newer, smaller accessory dwelling unit. It's going to be part of the regulation development code update. So the intent of House Bill 1337 is to expand housing options by erasing barriers to the construction and use of accessory dwelling units. Within this, we need to ensure that accessory dwelling unit development regulations address the requirements to allow 2 ADUs per lot. Our current code limits 1 ADU per lot to a single-family structure, and within that single-family structure, the property owner needs to live there. That is no longer a requirement now. And the maximum size of the ADU, we cannot require ADUs to be smaller than 1,000 square feet. And the development or design standards for ADUs cannot be more restrictive than the principal home. So this is what I was referring to on the previous slide. Our current code limits the design of an accessory dwelling unit to maintaining the design of the main building or the characteristic of the main home. So this allows more flexibility in the type of ADU that can be built as far as materials, color, just overall design. And we must allow for the conversion of existing buildings to an ADU, even if it's not conforming. And then our impact fees will need to ensure that we are not charging more than 50% of a single-family residence for the impact fees for ADUs.
So currently, our impact fees actually meet this requirement. So all those things, we're actually okay on that one.
This is a picture of a lot within the city. It's on W Street. I kind of wanted to give you guys a visual example of what this might look like if we were to allow 2 ADUs on an existing single-family residential lot. I have some property information here, so it's about 0.25 acres. I got rough estimates of the house size and garage. I wanted to show this because we also have other development standards when it comes to lots and zoning, such as site coverage limits, setbacks. So yeah, we have this house on W Street. Our current regulations would allow 1 ADU. Off-street parking requirements could apply, and it would have an 800 square foot size limit, and it must resemble the current residence. And then this is what it would look like if we were to allow 2 accessory dwelling units. Some things to consider. Going back here, we had a lot coverage limit of 60%, which is approximately 6,534 square feet. So I provided, probably hard to see, but I provided the area, our setback limits, but things we want to consider. The state's also allowing ADU ownership. So that means someone could buy the residential unit, the ADU, and not necessarily have to go through a subdivision process.
Basically, it'd be a condo. They would own the building itself, and then they would have a shared arrangement with access and everything else.
Looks like we have a question.
Councilmember Kathy?
Yes, thank you. Just 2 things about looking at this particular slide. Is there going to be a requirement in doing something like this, say on a lot similar, about tree retention?
That's going to be one of the big discussion points of how these requirements fit with all the other requirements we have. And I think you touched on the tree retention is one part of that. Open space requirements is another.
Yeah.
Impervious surface requirements, as Erica mentioned, are all things I think we'll have to be thinking about. Because number one, we can't prohibit this kind of development from occurring. But at the same time, obviously, we have concerns and we want to make sure that we want to, we don't want to lose what we have necessarily in other parts of the code. So we'll be seeing how this works.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that, those 2 things we just mentioned, open space, that we require in other, building of homes and apartments and things, and tree retention, as we have spent a lot of time on talking about the tree canopy, and all of the things that you just mentioned are going to be really important in this. And I think that we have to definitely do that, and then we have to be, I don't know, not careful about it, but people who want to do this just want to do this because this is their property. So there's going to, having fair and good conversation with the people who want to put in the ADUs and say, this is my property. And so I should be able to do whatever I want on it. So I'm glad to hear you say that we need to consider all of those things. So thanks for that.
I think it's important to also understand that there are things that we can choose and not choose as part of this discussion. The state has sort of set the baseline of what we have to allow. And we're going to have to do some thinking about how we can meet the state requirements at the same time that meet some of the other things that we said that are important. So
yeah, a
that
city
gets
has
to be more complicated.
Yeah, that's good, Brad, because the city has to continue to value, keep the values it has in housing and environment while also doing this. It's kind of a, a balance. Thank you.
Brad, I have a question.
Okay, Councilmember Jefferson?
Yes, I like the ADU concept. because it's gonna make an immediate impact on the supply. My question is it going to look like that? Or is it gonna include tiny homes? Because I know people are already renting out trailers that they have. So is it gonna cover that also?
Actually, Mike, I have your help on answering this. That gets into our building code related issue about what we currently allow under our building code as a tiny house. You know, some things on trailers, for example, probably not allowed. It has to be on some level of foundation. But ultimately, how small it can be is really governed by what the building code allows. And the building code has been revised a lot lately to have smaller and smaller areas required for habitation. So that's an interesting question. But we wouldn't be necessarily allowing a trailer that could be moved as an ADU because that doesn't fit our definition under the building code. It's not something we want to encourage probably because we want to make sure that obviously water and sewer connections are permanent, those kinds of things.
Okay,
But yes, it'll make things more interesting.
okay. Thanks, Brad.
That does bring up a point I was going to make. With meeting with stakeholders prior to our housing open house, we met with developers, and something that they brought up was the cost of building accessory dwelling units. And they really voiced that if we would allow prefabricated units to be allowed on lots, it would actually cut costs and help with the supply and demand of ADUs. Some developers were saying that it costs just as much to build a stick-built ADU as it does a residence because of the building code, the heating requirements, energy code. So to have those prefabricated designs or the ability to place those on a lot could help bring up more supply of accessory dwelling units.
Is there anything that keeps them from doing that now, or can they?
Actually, no. Our manufactured, well, I think we need to make some changes for manufactured code right now because it has minimum size requirements as part of that, which don't meet state law currently. But yes, we would allow that. The key thing with the stick belt is it requires a person to carry everything to the backyard or crane it over, and that takes a lot of time. And if you could have something built and lifted into place, it's a lot more efficient and saves a lot of time and money. So.
A question, if I could. Does accessory dwelling units include multi-story? Like if the principal home was structurally sound to support additional stories?
An accessory dwelling unit could be a basement. It could be the garage converted. It could be a floor in existing house, or it could be a separate standalone two-story ADU.
Or an addition.
Or an addition.
Okay. Another thing to consider is permitting and recording. If the owner is no longer required to live on site, and if people have the ability to purchase their accessory dwelling units as condos, what does that look like for permitting and record keeping? Part of the regulations, we are going to talk a little bit about parking regulations as it applies to accessory dwelling units. These are some examples from other jurisdictions. So we have the city of Fircrest, Kenmore, Sumner, and Kirkland. The requirement per the state is no off-street parking is required if an ADU is within a half mile of a major transit stop. For lots smaller than 6,000 square feet, one off-street parking is required. And then if the lot's larger than 6,000, then two off-street parking spaces would be required. But there is flexibility in jurisdictions to create parking requirements that fit their jurisdiction. So I wanted to provide some examples for you guys, just food for thought when we're looking at updating our code. So is there any more comments or questions after some thinking about how we could simplify our code to allow more ADUs or any other concerns.
Ooh. Oh, okay, I guess I would pose the question maybe a little bit differently, and not so much the simplification of the code language, rather than getting the word out. You know, more of an awareness campaign about what's possible for people.
And I agree with that. I just also want to let you know, we're in conversations with Lacey and a couple of the other jurisdictions about revising, revamping the ADU plans that we have, the pre-approved plans, and how we could improve on those. And an important part of that is the education component. And we've also been talking to some of the other jurisdictions about reaching out to local banks and lenders about specific loan structures for these kind of different things besides single family. And they've been receptive to that. So we're hoping to tie a lot of different things together as part of the education. You can do this, and here's how you could do this.
Michael, and then Michael.
I had two things, and one was to mention about financing. Was a couple of years ago, I think it was Olipop, did a webinar on how to secure financing for ADUs, and one of the institutions that they talked to a lot was OB Credit Union, because they have found the ability, when determining what type of loan you can be financed for, to actually take into account the revenue you would receive from rent as a property owner. Then you're able to bank that essentially as your income source, a future potential income source and security. But so I guess one question I had was if there was any kind of legislation that was tied to missing middle to try to support that, to make it more broad, because they seem to be the only institution in town doing it.
Not that I'm aware of, as part of the discussions on housing.
The other point I was just going to make, which is basically what I said earlier, when it comes to looking at the parking requirements, and that sort of seems like a way where if the city wanted to frustrate the spirit of the missing middle bill, they would be able to through parking requirements, I think. And I would be really disappointed if we end up in that category. I think we need to address parking requirements in the spirit that missing middle intended us to. In terms of, I think that's been a major impediment of us achieving. So I think that's the direction that I really think is important to try to achieve.
So I'll go to Michael, and then Terry, and then I see Councilmember Kathy's hand up too.
So, who was it who mentioned, like having a trailer in their yard, like an ADU? With changes like this, what sort of, practical measures can be taken to prevent someone from just, you know, going down to the hardware store, buying a shed, putting it in their backyard, and then putting it out on Craigslist saying, oh, I've got an ADU, you know, your own separate entrance, you can.
Provided the shed meets our building code. Again, whether or not somebody is doing that, or they're making a conversion in their house and not getting permits for it, all those kinds, that becomes an enforcement issue. But, you know, our codes and so forth it has to be a habitable structure and has to have minimum life, health, and safety requirements that are embodied in the building code. Added to that, of course, is the energy code and everything else that complicates matters. But, you know, there is an established level of permitting requirements.
Terry?
What crosses my mind is what's gonna happen. We proceed with this, that these ADUs can be sold. Is that a realtor is gonna walk in there, because the person who's renting the unit is not gonna be able to buy it. They're not in any kind of a condition to purchase the property. So the person's gonna purchase the property, he's gonna be a realtor, and you're gonna have a guy owning 100 ADUs in town and renting them out. We want that.
I don't think we have the ability to regulate that under the state law, since we can't regulate ownership.
I don't think we can either, and that's what bothers me.
Not sell the house.
Yeah, you
can. That's what this,
You would be able to, you would have to have some arrangement for access and use and everything else to the ADU itself, essentially a condo kind of ownership. But yes, it'd be possible.
Councilmember Kathy?
Thank you, Mayor. I think that Michael brought this up, and Michael Althauser. I know we may have other Michaels there, I'm not sure, but he mentioned the parking, and I wanted to also bring that up, because as people have gotten, some little whiffs of what is going on or what could happen, or, this missing middle business that many people in Olympia were opposed to, that are really concerned about the parking, and they're envisioning their street cluttered with cars and cars that don't move and different things like that. So I was glad to hear Michael say something about that too. I really think that's a piece of this that we're really gonna have to look at. And anyway, that's been some feedback that I've heard. Not a lot, but enough to know that people are thinking about these possibilities. So I just wanted to bring that up. Thanks.
Any other questions?
With the parking, when I think about these House bills, I think statewide, and hopefully once we go dig deeper into the requirements, there is flexibility for developers to provide a certain amount of parking. We're just sticking to the minimum or maximum required by the state, but this is what we've talked about so far is just what we can require. It doesn't stop developers or people building housing from providing more necessarily. Thankfully, it seems like we do have more flexibility to tailor our update to us specifically as a jurisdiction. So that is something to keep in mind too. We definitely don't have the transit services of a bigger city like Seattle, where maybe less on-street parking or off-street parking isn't as big of a deal. So that's just how I'm looking at the parking moving forward, statewide, and being able to tailor it to the city of Tumwater.
If we want to get better transit, speak to the mayor. Speak to Mayor Sullivan. He's in charge of
Oh, yeah. All right, we're on a time limit, so I think Brad is just gonna breeze through the.
Did you have just a quick question about, do we have any examples of places, whether in Washington State or farther afield, where cities have a little bit more maturity with developments like this that we could learn from?
I'm hoping. Don't know offhand.
So, they've already explored some of these issues and.
That's, again, like I said, we're hoping the Central Puget Sound comes up with some wonderful examples. I'm not aware of anything that's come through yet, because I think they're still deep in the process of figuring it all out and getting their things done. But we have about 10 minutes left, so what I'd like to do is very quickly hit on some of the high points, just to have you think about this also afterwards. And then set us up for our next joint work session, which is our next meeting. We'll be touching on climate. This is to encourage you to come back. We'll be talking about the new climate element, and we'll have engaging discussion from our consultant and other staff. Did that get enough attention? Very quickly, co-living housing, we sort of touched on this a little bit briefly with Commissioner Bias. This is, we have to increase the supply and affordability of residential units for people below 50% AMI, and one way to do so is to reintroduce rooming houses essentially to the mix. We actually currently allow this in a couple of our residential zoning districts. What this kind of looks like, and this is from Seattle, you have separate bedrooms, but you have shared kitchen facilities, shared living area, and a shared bathroom facility. So there's a variety of mixtures. An existing house would be a perfect example of this kind of thing.
But there's also developments that have gone this route, brand new developments. Whole series of requirements, I won't go through all of these. But again, this will be part of our future discussion. On existing uses, buildings for housing, we have to, and this applies to us primarily when we're looking at office buildings in terms of reuse. We have some proposals before us already in some of the empty state offices to potentially redo as residential. There's requirements that are on that in terms of allowing increased density above and beyond what we currently allow for those kinds of uses, which is another thing to keep in mind when we're calculating infrastructure needs going forward. There's also some things regarding not requiring additional parking and so forth. So just to be aware of it, this is another thing that's coming. It'll be in a very specialized area, but there's some good examples. If you look through your packet, you can see this particular example of a reuse of an existing building for near transit and near apartments for this. Also, if you want a local example, the Mistake by the Lake, this is a conversion of a state office building, and that seagull is not 6 or 7 feet tall. It's actually closer to the camera if those are concerned about that. But again, this is probably the best local example of this. Other housing things I want to briefly touch on. We've sort of started the discussion about parking, but a lot of the parking requirements are tied to being near existing transit. And transit service is a particular, how many trips per hour and so forth by the transit. So we have 2 transit lines in the city that go north-south, one on Little Rock, essentially, one along Capitol. The requirements would apply for anything within a half a mile of those areas. So it's a pretty substantial component of the city that would be covered by some of these changes on the parking side because of being close to transit. I want to touch briefly on a couple of things that are religious-sponsored housing that were part of recent legislation. The first one would be, there would be an allowance for an increased density bonus for affordable housing property owner controlled by a religious organization, provided certain things are met. Our code currently doesn't allow for this, so we'd be adding this as another housing incentive within our requirements. The second one is dealing with existing regulations on outdoor encampments, essentially Chapter 1859, which is our temporary use chapter, dealing with homeless encampments. We haven't touched this in about 12 or 15 years now. There are state legislation that says we must allow religious organizations the ability to do this. So you will be opening this as part of our discussions as well. Community engagement, I just want to let you know that we have scheduled a community open house for October 2nd. There will also be an online component similar to what we're doing right now with the housing element. So we'll be touching on a lot of the issues we've already talked about, and hopefully we'll be more advanced in terms of potential directions that we're going. Again, we're in the middle of planned development phase, and we just want to point out our project website has been updated and includes every possible piece of information we can in one spot. So if you can't find it here, it ain't there. Great tagline. It's true. But more importantly, we've been putting all of our staff reports, presentations, survey results, and all that kind of stuff up here. So need information, go there. And written comments are always accepted. So anything that we should be addressing going forward that we haven't talked about?
Brad, we haven't directly talked, this is Joan, we haven't directly talked about, but I wanted to give you and your team a compliment. Someone was looking at the online thing that you just showed, and they really appreciated the title at the top that said, you know, kind of the combining when we're doing all this work between, you know, community and nature. And I just want you to know that some people picked up on that and appreciated that that's what we were doing. We were paying attention to what expansion of living units will mean for Tumwater, and respect for nature as we go along. So I wanted to say thank you for that.
You're welcome. That's Erica's responsibility because she came up with the logo.
We voted on it.
We did vote.
We voted on it.
Oh,
We
Oh,
also
thank-
had discussions about the dichotomy between the two, but we'll talk about that further.
you're learning what to do to keep certain people off your tail. I understand. It's great. Thank you.
Councilmember Jefferson? Councilmember Jefferson?
Yes, great briefing. And to Brad and the planning commissioners, I just want to say thank you for your service. Sincerely, every month you come in and you work selflessly. And I know we had spoken before about a stipend like Olympia for our planning commissioners. I didn't see that in the budget. Perhaps it was overlooked, but we can have that conversation later on, Mayor. But I just want to say that I appreciate your hard work on this and to make Tumwater a better place. Thanks, everyone.
Any other questions or comments? So I'm enjoying this face-to-face instead of doing it all in Zoom land. And because we don't get to see each other very often, so I really do appreciate it. Kind of like old home week for me. Terry and I, how long have you been on planning commission? I know, because I was on like 23 years ago, so yeah, it's kind of like old home week, so yeah, I appreciate it.
So planning commissioners, please pick up your placards and follow me out the door.
Thank you.
Single file.
Line up.
Line up alphabetically. We didn't get to our sticky.
If you guys want, feel free to, select a type of metal housing that you prefer on the board there with a sticky. Do you have
Can I
time?
have all the stickies?
Yeah, you were like, right on, I needed some of these.
You know, we can allow up to 6, so up to 6 if I'm okay.
Okay.
Oh, Terry, your placard.
We don't get. Would be interesting, the whole cottage housing thing, Seabrook already does that, and it's really cute.
We love cottage house.
Well, there is a cottage, I used to
Yeah,
live
they're
next to
good.
one.
Yeah.
But we don't have to,
On
anybody-
Ruddle and, over on Ruddle, there's a cottage, there's a cottage housing.
we don't have it yet.
So we enacted cottage housing in order for the
Right.
habitat that
Right.
are going to move
Yeah.
forward.
Right.
I think that'll be our first true set of cottage
Well,
housing.
actually,
they're
no,
townhouses,
there's
right?
another one that might be coming for senior housing.
Okay. It'll be done before.
Oh, really?
Habitat?
Where's that one?
Well, Habitat, this one is more condos, not, cottage.
They're townhouses.
They're townhouses, not
Yeah,
cottage.
but they have a central court.
Right, but it's not classified as
Oh, I
cottage.
thought it was classified as cottage.
You're right, because that's why we did the cottage houses.
Yeah.
Right,
So we call the farm kind of freaked out about it. 90%.
yeah. All right. Okay, so we'll move on to we just have the mayor and city administrator report, and everybody will be out of here early.
I have a few things on the city administrator report, so hopefully I'll get you out of here early. So I just wanted to give you an update on a few things. First of all, the Capital Prosper project is, very close to wrapping up. And so the communications staff and the transportation staff have been working on a ribbon cutting. It's a decades-long project. It's actually coming, really close to being done, and, we feel it's time to celebrate. So, save the date, Wednesday, July 24th, and I will put this in my Friday update this week. I'll try to remember to do that, so you have it, in writing, but Wednesday, July 24th, from 1 to 2, we're gonna do it on the southwest corner of the
Capitol and Trosper, basically where the old faux restaurant is. The program is gonna be just a welcome. We're gonna have remarks by both, Debbie as well as Pete, and then we'll have a ribbon cutting. The invitees are mayor, council, management team, some staff, project staff like Bill and Colby. And then we'll also invite, John Doan and Pete Komet and, Jay Eaton, as well as then, the funding agencies. So TIB, TRPC, and, WashDOT. So we expect, to have a nice little get together. We'll have a shade tent because it's likely to be very warm. But looking forward to that.
Cake? We get cake?
We talked about, it's like, should we do cake?
I'm sorry, that's just my thing, sorry. No cake, no.
I'll find an event to have cake for you, Eileen, but maybe not then.
That's the only reason I did this, that's what's the Sunday on.
Yeah.
Just for the, that's a lot of work for that.
A lot of work for a little bit of cake.
Just an update on South Pacific Restaurant fire over the weekend. So, you guys saw a lot, there was a lot on our social media, as well as on Thurston Scanner, but and in the newspaper, they've done a great job at just kind of, put a little bow on that. So the initial call was Sunday afternoon around 2:00. It was a small fire that was on the deck that's on the west side of the building. That was actually extinguished pretty quickly. The crews returned to their stations and they were called out about 20 minutes later, around 3:30, to a much larger fire that was spreading rapidly on the same side of the building, but not in the same location. So it wasn't the previous fire blowing up again. It was a new fire in the same general location. It took approximately 3 hours to get the fire under control. The crews were basically on site for most of the night, putting out hot spots, and then it's in a really visible location, so they just wanted to make sure that the public was feeling that everything was safe and secure. The roads in the area were closed. They were back open Monday morning. And then I wanted to share that mutual aid was provided by the City of Olympia, as well as the Lacey Fire District 3 and the McLean Black Lake Fire District. And something that I didn't actually really think about, but was brought to my attention and I wanted to mention to you all too. So we had our Tumwater Fire Department personnel on site, but we also had people from Water Resources, from the Transportation Department, and then of course the Police Department. So it was a real coordinated effort. Our communications staff was working with the fire department the whole time, so it was just really glad no one was hurt. Really grateful for the hard work on the part of the Tumwater personnel and staff, and really appreciative of the mutual aid from our partners.
I might add one thing. I saw that there was a Facebook post of possible suspects on the police department's Facebook post. So there's some video of suspects. I shared it on my Facebook, so it comes from TPD.
I think the Thurston County one too, they had something about 2 people running away from
Right,
the
but they
building.
actually have videos.
Oh, wow,
of them.
okay.
Yeah, it's been a really great example of a good response to a challenging situation. So next steps, the building has been posted by Al, building official. So, and I noticed this morning that the fencing, the property owner has put up fencing, and we'll be working with them on next steps. You know, we need the building to come down. I think there's probably a timeline within which that happens. And if they choose not to do that, which every indication is that this particular property owner is cooperative and is going to do that. If not, it goes into a violation process, and we'll work hard to get it cleaned up. That's just a really visible location. We want to make sure that it doesn't stay there and keep us preoccupied too long. So, July 4th parade, council participation. I think this is your absolute last chance via Chuck Denny to provide us with your waiver to participate. We have one waiver so far. Let us know if you need the waiver, if you're not going to participate. If it's just the one person, we may not do it, because I don't know if that one person wants to.
I couldn't sign it
I couldn't-
electronically.
She sent me a DocuSign, I signed mine, because
Oh.
you can't sign those documents. They-
Okay.
Yeah, and so, she sent me a
Stephanie?
DocuSign, Stephanie sent me a
But if
DocuSign.
you want, if we can print it out, I can sign it right
Yeah.
there. Yeah, just print it.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, that'd be great. Okay, okay.
Oh, darn,
So
right?
you are intending to go, Kelly, I think, okay, so we just
Yeah,
need.
just print, that's
Yeah.
enough.
Okay.
I would-
She didn't like just getting an email. So I was like,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. So, so we have two, if anybody else would like to join, ride on the old style fire truck, with one of our awesome firefighters as your chauffeur. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about in July, so, your July meetings are, going to be very full. They will likely take some time, and we may be asking for council action in something other than typical fashion. So for example, we have one issue from Public Works, from Transportation, that we are going to present to you for the first time on consideration and ask you to act on that, largely because we've got the Public Works Committee meetings have been falling on, AWC week and the holiday next week. And, we're in the middle of construction season, and we need to get a bunch of things out and going, particularly before the August recess, mostly related to capital projects. So, we'll try to, make you as aware of those ahead of time as possible, draw your attention to those items, in your packet, so that, hopefully you'll, have time to give us a call and ask questions if you have any potential concerns about those things. New communications manager, Jason Whitstein, starts on July 8th. We're really excited to have him join us. I put it in the Friday update. I don't think it was last week because I forgot to do one last week, but the week before. He has a bachelor's degree in communication from PLU. He's worked in communications, public affairs, and media relations for state agencies, as well as nonprofit educational and social services organizations. Most recently, right at the moment, he is communication director for the Washington Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and previously held a similar position for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So he was community relations manager at Evergreen State College not many years ago, but I think a couple of people prior to you at least, I think. He's really highly qualified. He's got a really great personality. He's very collaborative. He's looking forward to joining the team, and we're excited to have him join us, absolutely. One quick update on the interim public safety measures at the Davis Meeker Gary Oak Tree. So we're continuing to work on our strategy for securing the services of a qualified arborist to conduct the second level 3 tree risk assessment. I'll have more information for you at next week's meeting on that. But I did want to share with you that Transportation Engineering has developed a memo that talks about potential interim measures to address public safety concerns. For right now, the current recommendation is to implement a temporary speed reduction in the vicinity of the tree, and then also to provide some nighttime lighting. The primary focus of those is to ensure that if there is a tree that falls and is in the roadway, that people are able to see it and avoid it and be able to stop in time. So we're going to try and move forward with those measures as soon as possible. And that's all I had. If I can answer any questions.
No questions?
There are certain types of public safety measures where we as the council would have to vote on things like road closures. These seem relatively minor, would not require a councilmatic vote, correct?
That is correct. There's the question of speed reduction. Karen's checking for sure. We don't think that's going to require council action at this point because we're trying to keep it within the parameters that don't trigger that requirement.
Yes.
The speed limit right now is 40 miles an hour. I believe the statute, says that as long as we aren't, deviating from that by more than 10 miles per hour,
Yeah.
that we're okay without council action.
Just a 5-mile-an-hour reduction.
Is a 10, we're gonna go for a 10 mile an hour, from 40 to 30.
Oh, I thought you said 35.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. I might have misspoke. But the idea is to drop it, but to do it in such a fashion that we aren't gonna have to come back to the council. If Karen says we do, we will pay back, and ask for that, potentially even at next week's meeting. Yeah, rerouting traffic, in some sort of a temporary measure outside the drip line, or detouring traffic, from an engineering and traffic, management standpoint, some of the risks associated with those, potentially outweigh those associated with the trees. So we're trying to do as much as we can to improve public safety in the current situation without increasing safety risks in other situations, so. Any other questions?
And I don't have much of an update because we were all at conference last week, and I'm still trying to get caught up. But I appreciate everyone who went to the conference. I think it was a really good conference, and hopefully be able to share some of that information. Because as you notice, when you have concurring workshops, you can only go to one.
Yeah. We tried to divide up.
Great. Any questions or anything else?
I just wanted to make one comment. So we've had the tree, the bear, the fire.
Oh, yeah. Wait, the other three,
Are we done?
Three, we're done.
Yeah, we're done, okay. Just checking.
Three, we're done. Yeah, it all comes to three.
Now something happens and we start all over again.
Well, we had a good article with Meredith Greer on the front page of the Olympia. That was for our salmon thing, so that was nice to
Yeah.
finally, get some positive good things are happening, so that was good.
Yeah, I would agree. There are, a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of really good things that are happening on a day-to-day basis here. We've got a really great staff, and they're working their tails off.
Yeah.
And doing a great job.
Yeah, I was very happy that nothing bad happened to the bear.
Yeah, thank you for not shooting it, like Lacey did.
So, all right. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
They shot that